Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's news flash on the show. Will there be a ceasefire coming? Biden's new proposal has gone out. It has done the rounds. We'll take a look at how people, especially in Israel, are reacting to it and the broader situation continuing to deteriorate in Rafah. Still a very, very important situation. And I'll present a pretty interesting theory from Omar Badar that has been highlighted by some Israeli reporting from Ynet. Also, Netanyahu has some good news in his domestic political situation and his foreign political situation as well. We'll tell you what both of those things are as we do our Palestine-Israel block. But we're not just talking about that. Also on the show, Claudia Sheinbaum, she has won the presidential election going away in Mexico for Morena, first female president that they have. Another win for the left-wing governing party after 6 years of domination from AMLO. And we'll tell you why EVs are getting cheaper. All right, so no time to waste today. We're going right into it. And we are starting with a little bit of starting with a little bit of Gaza today. So we're going to start with this here in the Middle East Eye. We have an ongoing Israeli invasion of southern Gaza's Rafah. And no surprise, really, to anyone here, the conditions within Gaza right now are unspeakable, according to UNRWA, which is the UN agency for Palestinian refugees. They said that in a social media post, adding that's becoming increasingly challenging to provide essential services. So, again, that is something that I think is probably one of the most unforgivable things, just for me personally, for Joe Biden, because it's like these people have experience. They have proven time and time again that they are the ones who are going to, and really the only ones who have been successfully able to help the Palestinians when everybody else has turned their backs on them, just as a people and as really just really one of the only groups out there that's treating them with any type of dignity, but also has the relationship. They employ tons and tons of people in Gaza, and they have the relationships, they have the knowledge to get that aid to people actually effectively, because they're going to do it in a way that's not just going to get the trucks ransacked by a bunch of hungry people the moment it goes in, like what was happening with the U.S. aid. But just, again, such a stupid decision that was just completely at the behest of Benjamin and Netanyahu's like kind of just far-right ideology, which, by the way, is in complete contravention of U.S. policy over the past, however many years, however many decades, really, of trying to support the Palestinian people in their rights to, or at least the lip service that they paid of trying to support the Palestinian people in terms of just not literally just bending the knee to every single whim, every single possible demand that Benjamin Netanyahu could possibly, even dream or dare to make. Like, he's just having his, it's been a pipe dream of the most brutally anti-Palestinian factions of the Israeli government for a long time that, Joe Biden has helped them realize. The ground attack on the city launched in early May, disrupted the flow of aid. This is Rafah. They're talking about here into Gaza after Israeli forces seized the vital Rafah crossing with Egypt and closed off aid. With more than 3,500 Palestinian children now at risk of death due to the Israeli policy of starvation, the Gaza-based government media office said on Monday. The children who are under 5 years of age suffer from acute malnutrition, are expected to be exposed to infectious diseases. The media office said that Israeli blockade has led to a shortage of food, milk, nutritional supplements, and vaccinations. Meanwhile, the Israeli bombardment continued across the Gaza Strip, killing at least 40 people and wounding 150 in the past 24 hours, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. As they're still also continuing to strike the Barej and Nuseirat refugee camps. Khan Yunis and Rafah strikes have also killed 22 Palestinians, including 9 children, according to the Palestinian news agency Wafa. Bombing also has been hitting Gaza City yet again, where 10 people were killed across Tel Al-Hawa, Zaytun, and Sabra neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Israel's war on Gaza has killed at least 36,000 Palestinians, with over 82,077 wounded, an estimated 10,000 missing, believed to be dead and buried under the rubble, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Separately, a suspected Israeli raid in the countryside of Syria's Aleppo killed 17 people, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The UK-based activist group said at least 12 of those killed were members of Syrian and foreign pro-Iran armed groups. In Israel, the remains of a man presumed to be a captive has been found in Nir Oz, a kibbutz where he was believed to have been killed during the Hamas attack on October 7th, which is kind of remarkable, the fact that they, and really remarkable of how evacuated that area has been since October 7th. Just now, in June, we are seeing, bodies still being found. Really remarkable situation there. Meanwhile, we do have to pay attention to this big thing that, everyone's kind of been talking about, which has been this deal, discussions growing in Israel over the Gaza ceasefire proposal that Joe Biden said that Israel officials presented last week. But we have seen a little bit of a conflict on that because essentially what Israel has been saying today was what they saw Joe Biden present was only a partial plan from what they agreed to and did not really meet all of their demands. But even though the conditions that were spoken out by Biden have angered far-right ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who threatened to quit Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition, which would spark its collapse. Smotrich, the finance minister, met on Monday with rabbis associated with religious Zionism right-wing political movement to discuss his party's future should the deal go ahead. According to the Khan sources say Smotrich was considering leaving the government even before the ceasefire deal could be agreed by Israel. Meanwhile, Netanyahu was set to discuss things with the much more reasonable Itamar Ben-Gvir in an upcoming meeting, according to Israeli media. That, of course, if you couldn't tell, is sarcasm. But after Biden presented what he said was an Israeli ceasefire proposal on Friday, Netanyahu's office issued a vague statement in response, which, again, essentially said, as we talked about on Friday, that they did not feel like the war aims of complete Hamas annihilation, whatever that means, and we've seen what that means in terms of a genocide on the Gaza Strip over the past, 7-8 months now. Forget how damn long it's been at this point. I think, 8 months in a couple of days. But the notion that Israel will agree to a permanent ceasefire before these conditions, the destruction of Hamas being the one that hasn't been fulfilled, the notion that they will agree to these conditions before this has been fulfilled, they say, is a non-starter. On Monday, Israeli media reported that Netanyahu told the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee that the outline of the proposal presented by Biden was not accurate. The prime minister was quoted as saying the first phase of the deal involving a temporary ceasefire could be undertaken without commitment to later stages. Biden on Friday declared it was time for the war to end as he laid out the plan presented by Israel. This is from the New York Times here. New York Times, Middle East Eye. According to the president, the first phase involves talks for the second phase, which includes reaching the cessations of hostilities permanently. Agreement on details of the second phase would take place during the first one, but the ceasefire would remain in place for as long as talks continued, he said. Netanyahu appeared to contradict this on Monday by saying Israel would not be obligated to end the war and fulfill all three stages of the deal after the first phase begins. And this is where we can see the big differences, and this is what we hear as well from Ynet's Nadav Ayel, who is an Israeli journalist. He says the senior Israeli officials have told him the plan presented by President Biden is indeed the offer that was made by the war cabinet, though there is one main difference, saying, quote, Israel has never agreed that negotiations between Stage 1 and Stage 2 can continue indefinitely during that time the ceasefire lasts. This might mean Hamas can keep the hostages that were not freed and continue to negotiate forever, thus achieving the end of war while still holding on to the hostages. The attached quote from President Biden's speech is what they're referring to. He writes, but again, the main point is that they confirm it is an Israeli proposal. Well, I mean, honestly, I think the main point is the big difference there, which I think really does reveal what Israel's plan is and what they've been saying. Because what we saw them do in the period over Thanksgiving when they had a ceasefire, were able to get some kind of public acclaim by getting back hostages from probably the group of Israelis that have been most critical of the Netanyahu government. They took that opportunity, but they also were able to take the opportunity that was left open to them of continuing the war the moment, that set period at that time was around a month. This time it's going to be about 42 days. And that is something, as we saw in the Middle East Eye article, that Benjamin Netanyahu is perfectly for. And it's something that, given the current direction of travel, I would not be surprised if we see Biden essentially come in and say, they're going to commit to 6 weeks. We're going to be negotiating really, really hard. and we'll hope for the best, or something along those lines, functionally, and that, because that would be exactly what Netanyahu wants to do, is continue to look magnanimous, continue to look like the peace people, as even though, the Hamas has accepted a framework for this 2-3 weeks ago now, they'll still be the peace people, the Israelis, for essentially working on this proposal completely, not really sabotaging it, but essentially just saying, or manipulating it in a way that is completely in their favor, so that they can say, oh, we're agreeing for peace. We're going to work really hard. We'll get a good chunk of our hostages, especially the alive ones, back in this phase. We'll get 30, 40 hostages back in this phase. Then we'll continue to negotiate. But, when that 6 weeks happens, all bets are off. Hopefully we figure something out. But in the meantime, we'll just keep bombing your asses. So, that is essentially what they are, it seems like they're going for here with this proposal. And with the U.S. quote is, essentially, this is what Biden means when he says this, is saying, given that Israel is already committing to this ceasefire after this first 42-day, 6-week phase, given that Israel is already committing to that, we as the U.S. will continue to push for these negotiations to come along. We endorse these negotiations continuing past that point. So, as long as Hamas is negotiating in the eyes of Israel, in the eyes of the U.S., they will be obligated to hold a ceasefire, and so will Israel. And as we can see right now with this Israeli reaction, they don't seem to like that too much. And it seems as if they may be experiencing some pull bounce from it, because Benjamin Netanyahu and his ilk, Likud, are making considerable political comeback after support for their party fell dramatically following October 7th. Going back further over a year, Benny Gantz's National Unity Party has been rivaling Netanyahu's Likud in the polls. October 7th, it was looking like a tie, with both parties polling about 30 seats each out of the Knesset's 120 seats. So Gantz's party is NU, and Likud's kind of rivaled in the polls here. So National Unity was about 30, and Likud was about 30. They're pretty much deadlocked as the two largest parties. For the next 5 months, though, NU polled at 40 seats, where Likud was below 20. It would even out a bit, but not much. Likud was clearly struggling, while NU, National Unity, was ascendant. A similar pattern was seen in polling for the politician Israelis preferred most for prime minister, even though Israeli election system is based on the election of a party, not a leader as such. Essentially saying, who do you want to be the face of the country? For October 7th, Gantz rivaled Netanyahu, and polls often showed a 40-40 split. Come October 7th, Gantz led with around 50% support, and Netanyahu fell below 30%. Started improving for Netanyahu in March, both in terms of popularity as well as Likud's position vis-a-vis National Union, but National Union and Gantz were still in the lead. This is what prompted Gantz to feel confident to issue an ultimatum. Either present a clear goal for future governments of Gaza, an alternative to Hamas, by June 8th, or he would bolt the coalition. A war is won only with a clear and realistic strategic compass. Gantz said, notice strategic, not moral. We must remember that the two people leading the National Union, Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, are both generals who boasted of returning Gaza to the Stone Age and who coined the criminal Dahia doctrine, respectively. These are people who have real experience cracking Palestinian skulls. The two joined the war cabinet in the wake of October 7th as an emergency measure. Netanyahu's office scoffed at Gantz's ultimatum, saying he should issue ultimatums to Hamas, not the prime minister. But Gantz was playing a high-stakes game, and he failed to see what was coming. Last week, ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan declared that he was seeking an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, among others, for crimes against humanity. This was a gift for Netanyahu. He called the court anti-Semitic, likened Khan to a Nazi judge, and even used this occasion to issue another genocidal biblical reference to the Amalek. Even though Netanyahu's liberal opponents rallied around him, what offended most Israelis is that it seems, and it really was quite remarkable here, and that this was such a freak out for them, because they felt that they were essentially, and it's kind of interesting, if they had left Hamas out of this, would they have been so offended? Because I think what really was, and we saw this in all the U.S. reaction as well, is this equivalence between Hamas and the evil, barbaric Hamas and Israelis who who have been completely unbarbarous and never been barbarous any time in their life. Ehud Omer said, "You take a murderer, a killer, a man who sends guys to butcher innocent Israelis, and you bind him with the Prime Minister of Israel, who's responsible for a counteroffensive. I mean, this is something that Israelis can't accept." That plays in favor of Netanyahu. Israelis are already saying, look, they're all anti-Semites. They're all against us. Again, talk about a murderer, a killer, like, again, people who sends people to butcher innocent civilians. Like, again, it's such a joke on the face of it, but it really does help him in the personal moment because he has really surged. The latest Channel 14 pollster Likud ballooned to a whopping 27 seats, while NU is back down under 19. Although prospective government coalition without including the National Union Party only polled at 58, just below the 61 majority. An opposition coalition that didn't include Likud would need to include Palestinian parties with 10 seats for a majority, and that seems unlikely as the opposition parties mostly come out on the center right. In terms of popularity for the Prime Minister post, it's now 44 for Netanyahu and 33 for Gantz. So pretty much a completely reversed situation. And you can really only accept that to surge as there's more pressure on, ceasefire and stuff like that. And by the way, that does show you what we are dealing with here with the Israeli society and how we are completely unequipped to solve this problem. And it really does require a much deeper kind of, U.S. intervention, U.S. involvement with this monster that we've created here and just a rampantly ethno-religious Jewish supremacist Israeli society that shows no signs of stopping, especially as we continue to enable them. The 27 seats for Likud are still far lower than the 32 seats they won in the latest elections in November of 2022, but it's not that far off, and it suddenly seems that Gantz's ultimatum to Netanyahu might have sealed his political fate. It's definitely a trend. Still, as this article shows, it's not enough as it needs. Well, he might have something to help him gain back some of those 5 seats in the polls. He has been cordially invited, officially, by not just Republican, but all 4 leaders of Congress, again, to speak at this. It's just absolutely unbelievable. It's incomprehensible. All of this stuff. I just cannot get it that I feel like if he just goes in and embarrasses the American, it may help him, with some of the right-wing base who's just like, we need to see him stand up to the Americans. And with this speech, I cannot emphasize how stupid this is, even from a position of just politics from the Democrats. It's not completely amoral and a complete abdication, given the fact that there, again, arrest warrants out, international criminal court arrest warrants about to be placed out for this guy, but he is being welcomed back after essentially Chuck Schumer told him he had to go, which is a complete humiliation. I think Chuck Schumer signing the letter to send this guy over. And secondly, he's just going to do nothing but endorse Donald Trump. It's completely unbelievable. It is just the stupidest thing I could ever imagine. Anyway, we are going now to our next story, where we have a pretty darn cool one. Mexico's first female president has been elected. The Morena leadership is victorious, and Kurt Hackbarth has a great piece on this. Talks about how the Morena leadership told in the Hilton Hotel in Mexico was in a quiet state of shock. This was last night in the capital, Mexico City. They didn't expect to win by as much as they did. They are incredible 30-point lead over her conservative rival. This is Claudia Sheinbaum, the winning candidate, over Xochitl Galvez, 58.3 to 28.7%, with the third-party candidate Jorge Alvarez Maynez coming at 10.5%. According to projections made by the National Electoral Institute, Sheinbaum's final total was expected to fall within a range of 58.3 to 60.7%, outperforming all but a pair of final pre-election polls. According to the Institute's Conteo Rápido, or Fast Count, the landslide was expected to carry into Congress as well, with Morena and its allies winning up to 380 of 500 seats in the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, and up to 88 of 128 seats in the Senate. This would really be a boon to the center-left coalition here, within a range of its ambitious goal of achieving a qualified majority of 2/3, which allow it to pass constitutional reforms on its own, together with the state legislatures it controls. And again, I think it pretty much controls all of the state legislatures at this point. It's absolutely a dominating force, very similar to what we see in India with the BJP. And there's been a lot of kind of very interesting comparisons to this, but it is, and we'll see more about the BJP victory as it gets counted throughout the week. But to put this in perspective, Sheinbaum is on course to best Manuel Lopez Obrador's 2018 landslide by a pretty big amount, where he got 53% by some 5 to 7 points. Where AMLO received a historic total of 30 million votes, Sheinbaum will have over 35 million. Excuse me. Really is just a wipeout. Similarly, Galvez was running about 10 to 12 points behind the Conservative Party's total in that election. In 2018, the Conservative Party's PRI and PAN ran separately. This year, they ran a coalition, but instead of adding numbers, the coalition wound up subtracting. It is incredible. It's just an absolutely dominating performance by this political force of Morena in Sheinbaum, who is essentially, from what I've read, is a pretty much a younger, kind of cooler, hipper version of AMLO, as someone who's pretty leftist politics, but maybe kind of definitely believes in a lot of the AMLO stuff in terms of direct transfers to the poor and nationalization of industry and the elderly as well, which was a huge help, and nationalization of key industries, but also much more focused on climate, much more focused on making Mexico more of a player internationally than AMLO was. So it's going to be very interesting to see what she is able to do. She ran an absolutely, barnstorming campaign where she racked up the miles, including holding 3 times as many rallies as Galvez. While Galvez veered from one uncosted policy proposal to another, Sheinbaum rolled a 100-point program that included extending social programs and scholarships, continuing annual minimum wage increases, consolidating Mexico's push towards national health care, building 1 million affordable homes on a rent-to-buy plan, constructing 7 long-distance train lines, avoiding the maquiladora experience of the 1990s by mandating that the companies invest in nearshoring phenomenon, providing higher wages and benefits, and in what is certain to continue raising the shackles of multinational energy interests, is that we've seen very, very frequent, an incredible AMLO speech where he essentially goes, "We're not the freaking colony of the U.S. anymore." Good, goddamn right. A public sector-led energy transition, and this is huge, building on Mexico's state-owned oil, electricity, and lithium companies. Throughout the campaign and over the course of 3 debates, Sheinbaum refused to be goaded by opposition candidate Galvez's scattershot series of attacks that got nastier over time. Galvez, playing to the hilt, a go-negative campaign strategy, attacked everything from her character to her family to her record as Mexico City mayor, including a little bit of anti-Semitism about Sheinbaum's Jewish heritage. Essentially, one of the big attacks was she was a puppet of AMLO. Every time someone would try to insist on the need to create a more individualistic image, if she were marketing a new brand of cereal or detergent, Sheinbaum would calmly explain that she represents a social movement and that her administration will proudly be the segundo piso, or second floor of Mexico's fourth transformation. And she did it all with a poker face persona that served her in good stead as mayor of Mexico City, one that, eschewing the attempt to force a lofty oratorical style, asserted her authority with understated consistency, both in interviews and on the stump, which voters apparently approved of, as we just talked about how big, whoppingly big, this victory was. Sheinbaum's victory came despite a coordinated international campaign of media and bots that attempted to paint AMLO and Morena as being in coalition with the drug cartels, which is a little ridiculous. And at the same time, they're in coalition with the drug cartels. They have also been seen the most candidates murdered by the drug cartels, and this apparently just makes that line ridiculous. And the reason why things have gotten so violent is because they're not doing this type of, PRI, PAN, if you watch, for example, if you go watch Narcos Mexico, you know how the Mexican government is much more accustomed to behaving with regards to drug lords, which is pretty much joined at the hip. And that is a big problem they're still working through now. You've got people like El Chapo and El Chapo's son and all that stuff, and just kind of refusal to make a deal. He's not exactly playing hardcore, but he is somebody who has been definitely not interested in resetting the status quo. But it's going to be a big problem, as violence has definitely surged. It's going to be probably the biggest problem for Sheinbaum to deal with. For the election, a gaggle of foreign journalists touched down in the country, marveling at such a machista country could be electing a woman president, and so comfortably. Once again, all of the comfortable tropes: election of states, voters bought off by social programs, a religious populace in the thrall to the handpicked successor of a messianic leader will trundled out. Anything to avoid granting agency to Mexican voters or seeing what has been happening on the ground. A policy-driven process of party realignment in which working-class voters scattered across all parties in the 2018 election have concentrated in Morena while maintaining the party's cross-class coalition largely intact. After victory acknowledgement in the Hilton, Sheinbaum made her way to the main square, the Zocalo. There she paid homage to the social movements from the past, from workers to students, teachers to farmers, and read out the names of women who have played pivotal roles in Mexico's history. As the latest member of that list, Sheinbaum will have an enormous mandate, even larger than AMLO's. And as of October 1st, the Presidente will now be the Presidenta. Pretty cool there from Jacobin and Kurt Hackbarth with his report from Mexico, and what is a really cool movement to study and just admire in the Morena movement, and just how they're able to, with their social policies, with their renationalization policies, be able to really capture so many people and be efficient for Mexico. Probably some lessons we could learn in the U.S. in terms of government. All right, pretty interesting stuff here to close out in the New York Times. Alex Lawrence, who is a dealer in Salt Lake City who specializes in electric cars, has seen a major change for EVs. They are getting cheaper. Customers are snapping up used Teslas for a little over $20,000 after applying a $4,000 federal tax credit. We're seeing younger people. We're seeing more blue-collar and entry-level white-collar people. The purchase price of a car has suddenly become in reach. Regarded by conservative politicians and other critics as playthings of the liberal elite, electric vehicles are fast becoming more accessible. Prices are falling because of increased competition, lower raw material costs, and by the way, we just found a shit ton of lithium in Pennsylvania, so we don't even need Mexico or China anymore. We're all good. Prices are falling because of increased competition, lower raw material costs, and more efficient manufacturing. Federal tax credits of up to $7,500 for new electric cars, often augmented by thousands of dollars in state incentives, push prices even lower. At the same time, technology is improving and making electric vehicles more practical. Cars can travel more than 300 miles on a fully charged battery, and they're becoming more and more common, those types. And also, charging times are dropping below 30 minutes. The number of fast chargers, which can top a battery in less than half an hour, grew 36% from April 2023 to April 2024. Car makers, including Tesla, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, the owner of Jeep, have announced plans for electric vehicles that would now sell for as little as $25,000. It is a real competition. It'd be interesting to see how it goes with Tesla, if they'll be able to kind of break first, because apparently that is really pushing down the profitability margins, because not only do we have the Chinese really surge in electric vehicle companies, the American companies are a joke, but you do have these American companies that are starting to play and really dominate. We're seeing, more efforts to grow the EV sector, getting our first EV union action as well, which is kind of a whole other conversation, but it is becoming a reality as the EV market gets more and more serious. The early adopters have come. They've got their cars. Now you're starting to see us transition to a mass market. All this is good for proponents of EVs in the Biden administration, which is aiming for half of new cars to sold to be electric by 2030 as part of the president's plan to combat climate change. Even when Republicans gain control of the White House and Congress and follow through on promises to dismantle EV subsidies, they may not be able to undo market forces that are pushing down prices, because people do want this stuff, because it can be, all the reasons of taking it out. And I would say, my family at least was one of the more early EV adopters, and it has become a more efficient infrastructure over time. Again, I don't know as much. I wouldn't invest in Tesla, for example, for the long term. But in terms of some of these bigger companies, we're seeing, the Bolt, for example. I love the Chevy Bolt as it's been able to, get improved upon. Electric cars, sales of which has slowed in recent months, are still more expensive than gas models, costing an average of $55,000 in the U.S. in April, according to estimates from Kelley Blue Book. But it is a decline of 9% from April of 2023. But there are estimates that cars and sports utility vehicles capable of traveling 400 miles on a full battery will cost less than cars with internal combustion engines in 2030, even before taking into account government subsidies. Pickup trucks, which require bigger batteries, will take a little longer, which they say it'll be about 2033 for 400-mile models. So these calculations do not take into account lower fuel and maintenance costs that strengthen the financial argument for electric vehicles. Electricity is almost always cheaper per pound than gasoline, and battery-powered vehicles don't need oil changes, engine air filters, or spark plugs. For people who drive a lot, electric cars may already be a better deal. At the same time, some automakers are offering strong discounts on EV models as an enticement for buyers. China supplies more than half of lithium-ion batteries used in cars sold in the U.S. Those batteries will become more expensive as the Biden administration announced in May that it would raise tariffs on them from 7.5% to 25%, which is a very big deal in terms of this cost. So it's going to be very important to watch how that market plays out. I'd say probably the biggest things are going to be this infrastructure around charging and, that battery quality. That is going to be a big enticement, obviously, as well as the price. So all very interesting to explore these factors. And I'm personally a big EV fan, although it's no substitute for walkable cities and better public transportation. But we could go on all day. All right, we're back Wednesday. It's Ceasefire.